everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Goethe-Institut New York. My name is Dennis Sartkol, and I'm the program coordinator for visual arts. And today I'm very happy to present on exhibiting Angela Davis, Curatorial Roundtable on Archives, with Kathleen Reinhardt, Elizabeth Hinton, Renee Guzman, Lisbet Tellefsen, Donna Gustafson, and Gerry Beegan. Today's conversation will take a look at recent exhibitions in the US and Germany that are influenced by Angela Davis. Our panelists will provide a deeper understanding on exhibition making today and the meaning of working with institutional and community-based archives. We have a big panel today, and in order to give you a better understanding of the exhibitions, our panelists will give short presentations, and afterwards there will be a discussion among them. And finally, you will have time to ask your questions. Please make use of the Q&A box for that and let us know for whom the question is intended. Also, this panel will be recorded and made available to you on our website and our YouTube channel. I will now give you a short introduction to our moderator and panelist, Kathleen Reinhardt, who represents our partnership with the Albertinum of the Staatliche Kunstsammlung in Dresden, and whose name you might have noticed on several of our Angela Davis events. She will then go on and give a brief introduction of the panelists. Kathleen Reinhardt is an art and cultural historian and since 2016, curator of contemporary art at the Albertinum in Dresden, where she has curated several exhibitions and the group exhibition 1 Million Roses for Angela Davis, which is the basis of our collaboration. She received her doctorate from the Arts of Africa Department of the Freie Universität Berlin in 2017. She has taught at Freie Universität Berlin and Technische Universität Dresden. Her writing has appeared in art catalogs as well as the magazines African Arts, Art Margins, Contemporary and Kaleidoscope, among other publications. Before handing it over to Kathleen, I'd like to thank our speakers and collaborators, my colleague Catherine Mahler here at the Goethe-Institut, and of course, all of you for coming. And now, enjoy the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denise. Yeah, I'm very happy and I'm very excited also that this can happen because we actually also managed to coordinate this through 3 different time zones. So from Dresden, where I am, to the East Coast, where of course the Goethe-Institut New York is, where Elizabeth and Donna and Gerry are, all over to the West Coast where Lisbet and Renee are, who are the early birds today, actually, yeah. And as Denise mentioned, I will give, or we will all give a short glimpse into our work around archives that are directly or indirectly linked to Angela Davis. And then we will open it to discussion and questions you might have. You can type your questions into the Q&A box while listening to the individual presentations. So questions might come up already. So feel free to already type them in there as long as your memory is fresh. And then I will just read them at the very end and we will enter the discussion. Yes, so I will very briefly now introduce everyone who is on the panel, and then after each presentation and before each new presentation, I will give you a deeper introduction into all of our very illustrious panel participants. I will go first, and after me, Elizabeth Hinton will be talking about her exhibition, Angela Davis, Freed by the People, which was on view last year at Harvard's Radcliffe's Schlesinger Library on the history of women in America. Combining the trove of archival materials kept at the Schlesinger Library with the papers of Angela Davis and the results of a 2020 conference, the exhibition presented a comprehensive view of Davis' life and work from childhood to the present. Donna Gustafson and Gerry Beegan from the Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University are preparing their upcoming exhibition, Angela Davis Seize the Time. And we'll talk about the productive tension between archive of historical grounded materials relating to Davis collected by the Oakland-based activist archivist Lisbet Tellefsen and the work of contemporary artists who both reference Angela Davis' historical impact and her continued importance in radical intersectional thought. Lisbet Tellefsen and Renee Guzman will be joining forces to talk about their collective work on Seize the Time, and also a show that happened earlier a few years ago, All Power to the People, Black Panthers at 50 from 2017. And now, yes, I'm very excited, as I mentioned, that I'll be sharing this illustrious round, and we'll actually also start with sharing my work on the exhibition 1 Million Roses for Angela Davis. So bear with me while I actually share my screen. And I hope you see this. This is the poster. It is, the show has been extended, obviously, now until May 30th. But unfortunately, museums and other cultural venues remain closed in Germany at the moment. So I can only hope that we can open to the public once again. 1 Million Roses for Angela was actually the title of the postcard campaign of the large-scale solidarity action of the German Democratic Republic, which I will refer to as the GDR, which was orchestrated by the GDR in 1971-72. At the moment, a small fraction actually of these of digitized images of these postcards are on view in the window exhibition at the Goethe-Institut, New York. So if you have time and are in New York, I just want to invite you to check it out. Over a period of more than a year, millions of these cards sent from East Germany flooded the mailing system of the court in California that was putting Comrade Angela Davis on trial. The GDR at that time was still fighting for recognition as a sovereign state, and a campaign of this size easily put it on the world map that was mined for it through the Holstein Doctrine. But it was also an instrument to reach the state's youth. This was the first generation that was born into a highly controlling state socialism, differentiating themselves from the construction generation that was strongly guided by communist values after World War II. In internal communiques of the GDR's political apparatus, one can trace how Davis was built up as a media personality, with which the stiffy old white men of the GDR aimed to create a pop star-like phenomenon for the doubting youth, a charismatic Black American Marxist who was also fluent in German. Angela Davis and her legal team eventually exposed the racist jurisdictional system after 1 year of trial. And after her release, she went on a thank you tour for the engaging support throughout the socialist Eastern Bloc, to which she returned again and again in the following years. In the GDR, she was welcomed as a state guest, graced the covers of magazines, and was portrayed in oil by the highest ranks of artists, bestowed with the great star of the Friendship of Nations, while masses flocked to her public appearances. Others remained silent, suspicious of the Angela mania that swept East Germany. The campaign was state-run after all, and therefore could not be trusted. Mistrust in the GDR's propaganda machine bestowed the name and image of Angela Davis with skepticism on the one hand, but on the other, an emotional identification occurred with her as an integral part of East German culture and remembrance. And here you can also see already images of the show with socialist realist paintings of Angela Davis that are today in the collections of museums. Race is not thematized in East German art history and visual culture. It was only named as something that could be externalized from the uncritical white imaginary that shaped and still shapes East German identity. People of color only found their entrance as foreigners in what cultural scholar Peggy Pische termed the socialism of difference. Historian Quinn Slobodian described this as socialist chromatism, in which different propaganda apparati plied in order to stage a multi-ethnic internationalism in which, and this is a quote, diverse races were celebrated who joined the struggle against imperialism, recreating race without racism. The exhibition 1 Million Roses for Angela Davis in Dresden is situated between this highly emotional and minefield of fractured remembrance, tainted archives, and the East Germany of today, where more than 1/3 of the population are protest voting for a populist party with fascist politics. The revenge this party is offering is constructed around the East's feeling of betrayal brought upon them by the West German high-speed reunification process of a neoliberal nature in the early 1990s, and the fear-mongering of anyone foreign and not belonging to white East Germany and its socialist past. In reiterating the Solidarity Action's title, the exhibition and the publication are using the semantic and poetic associations of this title to disturb this constructed and flawed one-sided remembrance and insert a corrective to reflect on national trauma, international or intergenerational dialogue, and to revisit Angela Davis' Black feminist Marxist project through contemporary artworks. The exhibition opens this thinking between the posts of post-colonialism and post-socialism with the Center for Unfinished Business by the online platform on art from an African perspective, Contemporary End, which you see on the left, and the video work Intervista by Albanian artist Anri Sala on the right. Contemporary End are offering a speculative library constellation here with a focus on Angela Davis' work as a scholar. So something that was not received in East Germany after all. In East Germany, Angela Davis was a pop star, not a scholar. Anri Sala, throughout his film, traces his own family history by confronting his mother with film footage she found of her as a young woman speaking during a congress of the Albanian Socialist Party. The notion of offering 1 million roses then has multiple valences and is used in the exhibition to explore a complex and bittersweet web of relationships grouped around the structure, a structure holding archival remnants and historical information. And here you have a glimpse into the exhibition and into the archive around which then the contemporary artworks are shown. What drew me to the artworks in the show are the highly different forms of identification with and articulations of what now appears to be lost alternatives. So American sculptor Melvin Edwards' work for Samoa Machel, shown on the left, is in conversation with Kabani Kivanga's Flowers for Africa, a multi-part project where the exhibiting institution recreates flower arrangements on the basis of protocols Kivanga created from archival photographs of the independence declarations of African states. Throughout the exhibition, these wilt, like the dreams of these decolonial movements. So in the exhibition, the bouquets of Algeria, Namibia, and Mozambique, so all nations that have a socialist history and stand in relation to the GDR's foreign policy initiatives are shown. Completing this triangle is a new commission by Angela Ferreira, which you see here. And her video sculpture is based upon an industrial printing press fabricated in the GDR to signify the size of the campaign. In the video, the artist weaves together footage of Angela Davis giving an online teach-in at the height of last year's uprising, a young Portuguese actor reading the poetry of Noema de Sousa, the mother of Mozambican poetry, in front of Lisbon's monument of Carlos I, and Davis speaking about Paul Robeson on her visit to East Germany. Paul Robeson, like Davis, was a celebrated hero of the other America in the GDR. And lurking in the back on the right is the installation. It's here. Bautzener Straße by artist Nassantur, which you see now up close in the upper left. So the artist photographed the cell doors of the former remnant prison of the GDR's secret police and installed them in a room with the exact size of a prison cell. Angela Davis' prison abolitionist engagement is in the exhibition Exchange for an emphasis on a psychological warfare the GDR discreetly and highly precisely raged against its own citizens, if their interpretation of socialism deviated from the official party line. On the right, you can see a still from Gabriele Stötzer's Cell 5, where the artist activist revisits her former cell for a performance of prison life's pressures to come to terms with the period in her life which radicalized her and which laid the foundation for her alternative approach to feminist thinking. Gabriele Stötzer was a central figure in the peaceful revolution of '89. She was one of the first to occupy the secret police's archives in order to save the files the GDR kept on its citizens. The absurdity of contributing to free Angela Davis from prison, while at the same time putting its own citizens in prison based on an intricate system of spies, is central to the understanding of the unstable ground actually the show is operating from. So Stötzer's recovery of her own history through a restaging of her trauma is mirrored by Sadie Barnett's reappropriation of her father's FBI files through acts of violating these papers of the infamous counterintelligence program with pink spray paint. I conclude with briefly describing Hugging Angela Davis, a new 2-channel video installation by Elske Rosenfeld, who retraces and reperforms the history behind a historic photograph that shows a breach of protocols in more than one sense. The image was made when Angela Davis, during a wreath-laying ceremony for the victims of fascism, turned around to the crowd and hugged a young woman. This young woman turned out to be Erika Berthold, who was part of a group of young dissident activists who campaigned for socialism with a human face, and was only protected from persecution through family ties to the party's elite. In the restaging of this touch, or better, almost touch between the two revolutionaries, Elske Rosenfeld continues her long-term project, A Vocabulary of Revolutionary Gestures, researching bodily archives for under-recognized alliances in search of a radical solidarity. What now needs to remain undiscussed is a large part of the exhibition, which I just briefly would like to walk you through because the exhibition is closed and I'm desperate, no one can see it, so you will see it at least. So one space combines the video 3 songs about liberation by Colleen Smith with works by Charles White, who was a corresponding member of the Academy of Arts in East Berlin and was also exhibited on many different occasions. And on the lower right-hand corner, you actually see him in Dresden on his visit to the art exhibition of the GDR in the Albertino. Iris Kensmil shows this or created this painting installation dedicated to the heroines of the Afro-German feminist movement, Katharina Oguntoye in the middle and Maya Yim on the left. It shares a space with Colleen Smith's Human 3.0 reading list on the left. In this space, Julie Moretto's Manifestation sets the tone for a conversation between works by Julia Phillips, Senga-Nangudi, and a rare underground artist book from the late GDR by Petra Schramm and poet Raya Lubinetsky. Arthur Jeffer's monumental Love is the Message of Death spells out African-American history through a cinematic collage of media images. And Stephanie Jameson and Justin Hicks' sound and object installation, One Giant Step, is mediating on what Sedija Hartman described as history as a project of listening for the unsaid. And here you also see a glimpse of Nina Simone, who we actually were talking about before the recording started. While Carrie Mae Weems' Slow Fade to Black series is presented as a connection to Angela Davis' book, Blues Legacies and Black Feminism. Alex Martinez-Rowe is picking up this thread by bringing feminists in conversation with one another around the notion of intersectionality. And actually now I'm stopping because we don't have enough time, but I hope you were just able to get a sense of the exhibition from which perspective it aims also to revisit the historical connection between the GDR and Angela Davis, and how I also attempted to think between or through basically also the lens of an abolitionist feminist project of Davis, which we are actually here to carry further. I will not talk about this, but I want to recommend, of course, the catalog that we did, which is taking this much further. And you can also then read some texts that were written about this very special relationship between the GDR and Angela Davis in the text, and also in the text of the dossiers that are on the Goethe-Institut website. So that was my little spiel here, and I am actually very excited now to introduce Lisbet Hinton, who will come and present her exhibition. So here she is. So Lisbet is a historian of American inequality, who is considered one of the nation's leading experts on policing and mass incarceration. Her past and current scholarship provides a deeper grasp of the persistence of poverty, urban violence, and racial inequality in the United States. She's an associate professor of history and African American studies at Yale University and professor of law at Yale Law School, and the author of the award-winning book, From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime, The Making of Mass Incarceration in America, and the forthcoming America on Fire, The Untold History of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s, which I think will be released very soon, next month. Yes, she is also a prolific writer of articles, and her articles and comments can be found in the New York Times, the New York Times Review of Books, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, Boston Review, and Time, for example. And she will be talking about her exhibition project, Angela Davis, Freed by the People, which was held at the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America at Harvard University's Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies. The stage is all yours, Lisbet.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for that introduction and also for the presentation. It's just like so exciting to kind of get a view or like this private virtual tour of the 1 Million Roses exhibit. Congratulations. And thank you also to Denise and the Goethe-Institut for bringing us all together in conversation and for including me, and of course, to all of you for joining us. So I'm gonna try to, there's so much, right? And I'm gonna try to do this as succinctly and quickly as possible. But as Kathleen said, I am not a curator by training, and I don't work in the art world or the exhibit world. I'm a historian, and so this is kind of a new experience for me. But I did serve as lead curator of the Freed by the People exhibit, which came out of an acquisition of hundreds of boxes of documents, letters, papers, photos, and more that were given to the Schlesinger Library by Angela Davis, and that really traced her evolution as an activist, author, educator, and scholar. And within the Schlesinger Library, Davis's papers join those of June Jordan and Patricia Williams and Pat Parker, and many other women who have really been advocates of justice and social transformation. So we received, Harvard acquired the Angela Y. Davis papers in 2018, and the show went up in September 2019. So it was a really, really quick turnaround. We had to, the archivist at the Schlesinger cataloged all the archives, and then I went through all of the boxes and selected items that that could be used in the exhibit. And on top of it, the space that we use within the Radcliffe Center was being newly renovated. So it was just all of these kind of obstacles that we encountered. And it was, you know, especially in kind of doing an archival exhibit while we were still going through the archive, was really a challenge. But I will say one of the many consequences of COVID for us was that you know, we had to close the show early. It was supposed to run through April 2020. And so many of the images that I'm using here are from the archives themselves. I have a few images of the exhibit itself, so to give you a little bit of sense, but I think what's most important is the way that we structured it and the images that we actually used. And this kind of gives you that was the poster for the exhibit, and it was based on this pamphlet that was released by the Free Angela Davis Committee. So it kind of, tells you how we use these archival documents, and then gave them this this sort of update. And this exhibit was really a collective effort. So Meg Rotzel, who is to my left, I'm in the center there, kind of leaned over, hunched over. Meg Rotzel is the one of the lead curator at Radcliffe, and we really work together as a partnership to put the exhibit together with my kind of historical expertise and her expertise as a curator, as well as Joe Zane, who is to my right, who is the gallery coordinator at Radcliffe and helped design the show, and a team of researchers, including one of my graduate students, Jackie Wang, who's next to Joe, and of course Ken V. Phillips, who was one of the top archivists at the Schlesinger. And what we really wanted to do was highlight, some of the findings of the archive in the exhibit, and to show how Davis's life really reflects the most important national and international struggles of the past half century, all of which have been shaped deeply by revolutionary action, the contributions of feminist analysis, and most recently, calls for prison abolition. And of course, Angela Davis, as a political activist and political philosopher, sits more squarely at the intersection of these pivotal movements than perhaps any other person. But we also wanted to emphasize, and this is where the title "Freed by the People" come in, that that Davis represented a community and a collective, and that she was made or freed by the people. And I think this is one of the things that that Kathleen's presentation really shows. The 1 million postcards, the 1 million roses that people around the world sent to her in support. Sorry, my daughter is. It's okay, baby. Sorry about that. So we use the archival materials spanning Davis's life and work to ground discussions of her rich tradition of activism and social theory in the late 20th century. So the exhibit was essentially split into 4 parts. Her early life is part 1. Sorry about this. My daughter just kind of got out of wherever she was, so I'm gonna hold her so she doesn't interrupt the presentation even more. So part 1 really focused on the Davis family, and then the rest kind of focus on the main currents of Davis's life as a political philosopher and activist around issues of revolution, feminism, and abolition. So this, really gives you an intimate sense, and I think this is one of the kind of strengths of the archive of the Davis family. We have the graduation photo of Angela Davis's mother, Sally Davis, coverage of Angela and her sister, Fania Davis's high school experiences in New York and New Jersey around the time that Angela graduated from high school, pictures of the Davis family, the Davis's home in Birmingham, and a portrait of Angela Davis and her mother. One of the other things that we really emphasized in talking about kind of like Angela Davis's coming of age in her childhood was the impact of growing up in Birmingham itself on Davis's politics. And so we also highlighted the impact of the 16th Street Baptist Church school bombing on the Davis family, who were close to many of the victims, including Carol Denise McNair. And we actually made an altar. This is from McNair's, I believe her funeral proceedings. We made an altar within the exhibit for that. So for Davis, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing was a real turning point in her own political consciousness, and she called it the most dramatic and horrendous example of racist violence in Birmingham. We also highlighted note cards that Angela Davis used in her thesis, which the kind of note cards that she used again and again throughout her time as a political philosopher and intellectual. So this is kind of, we wanted to give a sense of her early life and influences. The second part is really reflected the meat of the archive, and that is which is themed around this idea of revolution. A moment in the late 60s and 70s when revolution seemed very possible. And Angela Davis was kind of at the center of a constellation of a number of different revolutionary movements. This was also, this period occupies, so much of the archive, because at the time Davis was kind of at the height of her fame and international press coverage, and of course her world tour. So, as many of you know, at just 26 years old, Angela was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, charged with being an accomplice to conspiracy, kidnapping, and homicide. And this was, of course, 1 year after she was accused of fomenting revolution in UCLA classrooms as a philosophy professor. And so on the top left, you'll see early press coverage where she was labeled fuzzy-haired, which I think is really important. Again, this like emphasis from the very beginning of coverage of Davis on her aesthetic and on her Blackness. We also included at the bottom right, the very first issue of the Free Angela Davis Defense Committee. So in addition to kind of the public facing Angela, the cover of Life magazine that people are more familiar with, we also, included intimate letters in the exhibit that Angela wrote to her parents while she was incarcerated, and letters exchanged between her brothers and sisters. Trying to go through this very quickly. This is another letter that we featured that reflects correspondence with fellow activist and member of the Black Panther Party, Erica Huggins. And an outpouring of mail that Davis received, in addition to the postcards from Germany, from, in this case, people who were incarcerated expressing solidarity. And this is an example of one of the letters, the one that's in the bottom right in the display case. We also, in an attempt to kind of show how divisive a figure Davis was, we also included hate mail that she received while she was incarcerated. We featured political buttons, and a number of different images celebrating her acquittal, but this one for me really stands out because it's a picture of Davis with her parents. We also really wanted to highlight the kind of constellation of people that were involved in Davis's case, including Ruchell Magee, who has been incarcerated since 1963 for attempting to steal $10 and was involved in the actions at the Marin County Courthouse in August 1970, and was the only defendant to survive, and he's the longest held political prisoner today. So one of my big archival moments was holding in my hand the bracelet that he had apparently given to Angela Davis. And of course, George Jackson. This is a picture of a young George Jackson that hung inside Davis's cell at Marin County Jail. And here you see it in the exhibit below a quote of Davis's stating that nothing short of a revolution will set us free. So, really highlighting this theme of revolution. And we showed too how, Davis kind of continued her relationship with the Jackson family through continued correspondence with Jonathan Jackson's son into the late 80s. The revolution part of the exhibit kind of closed with cases celebrating the post-trial international tour that Kathleen already kind of gave us a sense of, but I'll just run through some of the pictures from Russia and other places quickly. This was in Russia. I love another one from Russia that I really love because it kind of shows Davis's ambivalent relationship to the attention that she was receiving as this kind of global revolutionary figure with Fidel Castro, and then just kind of giving you a sense of where, these pictures with Castro were from a scrapbook that we included during a trip to Cuba in 1972-73, along with Davis's Russian passport, one of her travel diaries, and a Lenin box that she received in commemoration in Russia. And so this is like one, this is the little baby that you just saw crying on my lap. But this is one of the few pictures that I do actually have of like kind of how we put this together on the exhibit, for the exhibit. We had an image in the back wall full of a mass protest demanding Angela Davis's freedom. And we kind of included this with pictures and newspaper articles, placards, etc. I know I'm probably running out of time, so I'm going to go through this really fast. The third part focused on feminism, of course, you know, the moment when Davis returns to her kind of role as a professor. The picture on the top right is her very first class at Claremont McKenna College. And, you know, as a writer of a number of books, including the autobiography, Women, Race and Class, Blues Legacies and Black Feminism, her work with the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression to continue to free political prisoners, and her run in the 1980s for vice president of the United States on the Communist Party ticket. One of the highlights from this part of the exhibit this is the archival piece of it, but were Toni Morrison's line edits of Angela Davis's autobiography, which you see here in the display case. And then the last piece really centered on the questions of abolition and the founding of Critical Resistance, which Angela Davis co-founded with Rose Braz and Ruth Wilson Gilmore in 1977 to challenge and eventually abolish prisons. In many ways, this part of the archive was the least personal. It contained the kind of least amount of the kind of intimate correspondence that other parts of the archive contained. And so, you know, most of this part of the exhibit was really focused on the literature within critical resistance itself. And we kind of closed out the main part of the exhibit with a nod to the kind of continued struggles to free political prisoners that Angela herself has been involved in. At the bottom right, you see in the mid-2000s, Angela Davis getting arrested, protesting the death sentence that Mumia Abdul Jamal received, and correspondence with Abdul Jamal and Assata Shakur, who remains wanted by the FBI. And finally, just really briefly, the kind of close of the exhibit encouraged visitors. We provided a space for study group reflection and activities for visitors. In the months leading up to the exhibit, the Radcliffe Institute had engaged in conversations with Boston public school students, and I led a study group with incarcerated women in New York about the life and legacy of Angela Davis. And these were actually the first groups to use some of the archival holdings at Radcliffe. And we included a slideshow of some of their writings and reflections and analysis of the archive to kind of highlight their voices within the exhibit themselves, and encouraged our visitors to respond. And the kind of the unofficial official opening of the exhibit coincided with this large conference called Radical Commitments, considering the life and legacy of Angela Davis, that was essentially divided into, that followed the kind of revolution, feminism, and abolition thematic emphasis of the exhibit. And that's how we divided the body of the panels. But we also included jazz performances by people like Vijay Iyer and Esperanza Spalding, and roundtables with family members and friends, kind of considering Angela Davis's life, and a keynote conversation with Davis herself. So I am sorry I had to run through that faster than I wanted to, and happy to continue some of the conversation after we learn about all the other exhibits. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And also thanks to your daughter coming in, offering a little relief of our very hardcore topic here. Yes, so I will continue introducing our next panelists. So Donna Gustafson and Gerry Beegan. So Donna, who might maybe want to switch on her video so we can see her, and also Gerry, great, here they are. So Donna Gustafson is the interim director, curator of American art, and the Mellon director for academic programs at the Zimley Art Museum at Rutgers University. Her research interests include photography and social protest, American art of the 20th century, particularly of the 1960s and 70s, and contemporary art. Her recent publications and exhibition projects include Subjective Objective, A Century of Social Photography, Guerrilla and Other Girls, Art, Activism, and Attitude, which is a great title, Donna. a solo exhibition of the work of Jessie Creams, and At, Around, and Beyond, Fluxus at Rutgers. She has published reviews and articles, presented papers, and organized symposia on a variety of American and contemporary art topics. Gerry also joined us. Gerry Beegan is a design historian and critic. His research focuses on the materiality of the printed image, on intermedial relations, and on print's role in creating and sustaining imagined collectives, whether it be the fin de siècle London or 1970s Oakland. He has recently contributed to 2 volumes focusing on gender and print culture from the 1890s to the 1930s. His book, The Mass Image, is an account of the emergence of photographic imagery in the popular press. He has published on design history and print practices in the New York Times, Design and Culture, the Journal of Visual Culture, Spike, and the Journal of Design History, among many others. He teaches in the Department of Art and Design, Mason Gross School of Arts at Rutgers University. And the floor is yours, Donna and Gerry.
Okay, thank you so much, Kathleen, for that introduction. And I want to say that we are both honored to be here with the other members of the panel. It's been a fantastic series of presentations already. And as you'll see from our presentation, many of the themes that come out of the archive discussions from Kathleen's show and Elizabeth's will also be part of the conversation that we bring forward in our discussion of our exhibition. So Gerry, if you want to share the screen and start the slides. So unlike the other members of the panel, our exhibition, which had been slated to open in September of 2020, was delayed a year because of the COVID and the closing of the museum. So we are planning on opening our show September 1st, 2021 at Rutgers University, the Zimmerli Art Museum, and we're keeping it up for 2 semesters. So it'll be up for the whole year, the whole academic year at Rutgers. So from September 1st to June 15th, 2022. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll start talking about our exhibition. So our exhibition began with a visit to the Lisbet Tellefsen archive in Oakland. It was the experience of seeing the archive en masse as a huge collection of visual and documentary materials that really made it possible for us to envision this as an exhibition for the Zimmerli Art Museum at Rutgers University. And the archive has been continually at the heart of the project. This is collaborative work. Gerry Beegan and I serve as the primary co-curators, but we enlisted many individuals at Rutgers and beyond to create the book, the exhibition, and the programs that are being planned around the exhibition. I want to thank Lisbet Tellefsen and Erica Huggins, Renee Guzman and his colleagues at the Oakland Museum of California, Nicole Fleetwood and Stephanie Jemison, who are both at Rutgers with us, Dayan Huff, who's now at the Studio Museum of Harlem, and many others who continued to participate in our planning process. And of course, thanks to Kathleen Reinhardt, whose exhibition was and is in conversation with our own, and the Goethe-Institut for organizing this panel today. If you could go to the next slide, Gerry. So there were 2 important tensions that structured our thinking about the exhibition. The first was in trying to position Angela Davis as more than an icon of the 1970s. We wanted to present her as part of a larger history, to see her as a living, thinking activist whose work has been ongoing for over 50 years now, and that work, which was built on the work done by others before her, and in turn creates the possibility for continuing the international struggle for freedom, equity, and justice. For that reason, we made sure to include works like these that place Angela Davis in a larger context of Black political thought and resistance. Both of these posters are from the Tellefsen archive. And you see Keith Walsh's Black Liberation and Socialism in America from 2017, and a French poster calling for freedom for all African-American political prisoners from 1971. And you can go to the next slide. The second important tension that we wanted to bring out was that between documents grounded in history and chronology and the freedom of artists to interpret and re-envision history. We decided early on to include the work of contemporary artists who continued to engage with Angela Davis as a force, an inspiration, and someone engaged in prison abolition and international struggles for freedom. And I'm showing you two examples of works that will be in the show by an artist named Juan Sanchez. One references the Young Lords, which was a Puerto Rican group aligned with the Black Panthers, who, like the Panthers, created a breakfast program for children, organized food banks and neighborhood patrols in New York and Chicago, as well as other cities. And from 2011, Para Angela, Sanchez uses one of the recurring images of Angela Davis from the 1970s in his print from 2011, and by so doing transforms her history into a struggle that continues into the 21st century. We also include the work of Stephen Torlens in the next 4 of his large photographs. These are each 40 by 50 inches from the series of lengths and measures are in the exhibition. These photographs are taken at night and focus on the settings of these prisons in isolated landscapes. In such places, the inmates are hidden from view behind miles of razor wire, cinder blocks, and electric fencing. So Stephen Torlens talks about the prison system as making people invisible. And this notion of invisibility is a theme that became very important for us. It comes up again and again in our exhibition, and it is one of the reasons why it was really so important for the Free Angela campaign to use her image and keep that image front and center, to keep it in the public eye and make her story and her trial a public event. And I'm going to now turn to Gerry.
Thanks, Donna. So as a design historian, my focus is on the entanglements between individuals and organizations through printed matter that transform and activate specific places and times. So buttons on t-shirts, and t-shirts on bodies, flyers in the windows of homes, posters at demonstrations or in bedrooms. These become tools for potential transformation and a means of sustaining imagined communities. And these texts and images also have the potential to continually reactivate issues of Black justice and incarceration. So by locating these images in production and use, we can resist the nostalgia and iconification of Angela that was referred to by Kathleen earlier. So this is important because Angela Davis always positions herself as part of a family of sisters, brothers, and comrades, and continually directs attention away from her person. So the FBI wanted poster made Davis visible in order to render her permanently invisible. But starting when she was on the run, multiple images of her were printed as responses to the wanted poster. So on the left, Sister, You're Welcome Here was the centerfold of the underground magazine Leviathan. And it's intended for display in the windows of homes, reconfiguring them as multiple places of refuge. These thousands of welcome posters conjured Davis as a potentially present person everywhere where the poster was displayed. And additionally, commercial posters of Davis were produced for domestic decoration. And we have many examples of both of these types of political and personal print in the exhibition. And these domestic posters could serve on the one hand as indicators of white rebellion and radical chic, as in the Rolling Stones song, Sweet Black Angel, and alternatively displayed in Black interiors, such as the photograph on the right. They could signify Black identity and pride. And because Lisbet Tellefsen's archival passions, I would say, are so all-encompassing, we not only have the materials themselves, but also an unusually large number of photographs of these materials in use. And this is an example of some of the materials in use. We've seen this image before. And these are two photographs on the left by Stephen Seamus, who is a white photographer who was associated with the Panthers in Oakland and took many of these iconic images of Angela. And on the right by Beaufort Smith, who's a member of the Comanche Workshop in New York City. And I think these two juxtaposed give productively different takes on Angela's image in demonstrations. And for us, the power of the archive lies in the connections and conversations and distinctions that the viewer can make. The key point is the collection is much more powerful than the individual pieces. And this sense of the archive as an active conversation shaped our conception of the exhibition. Again, on the left, we have a stunning commercial poster produced by Herb Bruce in 1971. And for me, it's totally in keeping with the energy of Shaft and other Black commercial movies of the same year. And on the right is a print by a member of the Afro-Cobra group, Wadsworth Jarrell, in which words associated with Davis actually form the image. And Jarrell's image is based on the same photograph lifted from Life magazine that was used in the posters shown in the Seamus and Smith photographs. And only time for a final juxtaposition. This is on the left, a beautiful but very hard to reproduce screen print on foil, printed in Mexico City by the artist Elizabeth Catlett. And then on the right, an image that we've actually seen before in Kathleen's, but this is actually a postcard reproduction of Love Letter No. 1 by Charles White, who was Catlett's ex. So Davis's cause resonated with many Black artists, including Catlett and White, and these pieces were produced to raise funds for the Free Angela campaign. So they were active pieces of art. White founded the Committee of the Arts to Free Angela Davis in California, and prints of Love Letter No. 1 was sold in support of the Free Angela and All Political Prisoners campaign. And so, although it's not a direct depiction of Davis, the image shows a young Black woman with a natural juxtaposed with a rose. And White may well have been aware of the Million Roses campaign, and also aware that the rose was Davis's favorite flower. And I think that's all we have time. Oh no, sorry, back to Donna. That's all I have time for. Back to Donna.
Thanks, Gerry. So we only have a few more slides. So it was also important to us that the exhibition includes sound and video. One of the videos in the show is AKA Mrs. George Gilbert by the artist Coco Fusco. And these are stills from the video. So as you can see, it's shot in black and white. It's a rumination on history, memory, Angela's story, and what the artist described as the, quote, Angela Davis effect, unquote, which was the arrest and harassment of many, many young Black women with naturals who were assumed to be Angela Davis. And this is, of course, while Angela Davis was on the run. And these women had to prove that they were not Angela Davis after being taken to various police stations. So what this did was basically have the effect of making all young Black women possible fugitives and suspects. And that's one of the themes that runs through this video by Coco Fusco. And then one more slide, two more slides. Okay, so this, we had also decided early on that we wanted to be sure to include the international dimension of the Free Angela campaign. So we included many posters from Lisbet's collection, from France, from the UK, from Eastern Europe, Cuba, Latin America, and Mexico. We also include the work of Moscow-born, New York-based artist Yevgeny Fuchs. I'm showing you a few images from his book, A Communist Guide to New York, which is in our exhibition, along with a slideshow of images taken from his research into landmarks of communist history in New York City. Again, with the intention of putting Angela's story into the larger context of the Cold War and the long history of African Americans who were targeted for their ties to the Communist Party. And you can put in that group, of course, Claudia Jones, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson, and even Elizabeth Catlett, who left the US for that very reason and lived much of her adult life in Mexico. And our final image then is by the artist Sadie Barnett. So there are several points of connection between our show at Rutgers and Kathleen's show in Dresden. Both of our shows include the work of Sadie Barnett, Louis Watts, and Stephanie Jemison and Justin Hicks. This is one of Sadie Barnett's recent works. Like the piece that you saw in Kathleen's show, it's based on the FBI surveillance of her father, Rodney Barnett. Sadie and her family were able to obtain hundreds of pages of FBI surveillance through the Freedom of Information Act, and these pages have inspired many of her works. They serve as a continuing link between her present art practice and the period of the late 1960s and 70s, when her father was a Black Panther and harassed by the COINTELPRO of the FBI. In our show, Sadie's work acts as a bridge between Angela's arrest, incarceration, and trial, and the continuing efforts of artists and activists to end racist practices, police brutality, and mass incarceration. And we can stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Donna and Gerry. That was actually great, and it's also very great that you stop with Sadie's work. I think who actually also brought us together, or brought like us to each other's attention actually, and I was also very excited to meet Sadie. I think that was already like 4 or 5 years ago, when she was exhibiting in Berlin exactly this work, and we had a very interesting conversation, and I then encouraged her for the remains of her stay in Berlin. She only had, I think, 1 day left to actually like go out to the Stasi prison in Berlin, and not to see the usual tourist attractions. And she was, she wrote me this very endearing also email that she was very grateful to have seen this and make this connection. And I'm very happy that that Sadie's work is in there, and I think Sadie's the conversation that was happening last week on the radio with Sadie, and also with Justin Hicks and Stephanie Jemison, will be available on the Goethe-Institut's website, and they recorded that. So where Sadie speaks also very detailed about this work and how she started to like continuously work on those files. Yes, so we have, and I also would like to encourage the audience to like type in your questions into the Q&A box while the last duo of our presenters comes on. And yes, I would like Lisbet and Renee actually to switch on the camera so folks can see you and meet you while I introduce you. Hey. So Lisbet Tellefsen, who's been referred to throughout actually the conversation, is an Oakland and California-based community archivist, collector, curator, and publisher. Her archives and collections range from political graphics and Cuban posters to Angela Davis and the Black Panther Party. Her archives are frequently used for academic research. As an archival consultant, she has worked on numerous films, including Black Panther's Vanguard of the Revolution and Free Angela Davis and All Political Prisoners. Her collections have been exhibited most recently in Angela Davis, Outspoken, currently online at the LGBT Historical Society, The Art of Collaboration at Yale's Banneker Library, and Get With the Action, political posters from the 1960s to the present at SF MoMA, as well as Black Power and All Power to the People, Black Panthers at 50 at the Oakland Museum of California. Over 100 objects from her collection now reside in the permanent collection of SF MoMA, the Oakland Museum of California, and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And Lisbet will be in conversation with Renee Guzman, who you also see in the video here. He's an independent curator based in the Bay Area. His curatorial practice has explored the relationship between visual culture and political power. In his role as Director of Exhibition Strategy and Senior Curator of Art at the Oakland Museum of California, he organized numerous solo and group exhibitions, among them Respect, Hip Hop Style and Wisdom, and All Power to the People, Black Panthers at 50, just to name the most famous ones. Previously, he helped start Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, a multidisciplinary contemporary art center in San Francisco. And during his 15-year tenure at Yerba Buena, René provided early support for some of the Bay Area's leading artists. He also taught as an adjunct professor at the Graduate Curatorial Studies program at the California College of the Arts, and his career is marked by a commitment to community and artistic experimentation. And I'm very excited to hear them talk and also to dive in once more into Lisbet's amazing archive. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. So Lisbet and I are, we have a format where the attention will be placed on Lisbet because I think that's what we're here for. But first of all, I wanted to thank the Goethe-Institut for organizing this wonderful event. I've been the beneficiary of a number of curatorial programs, so I can say firsthand what incredible cultural diplomacy they're doing, not only in the United States, but all over the world. I'm so pleased to be on the same Zoom call with Kathleen and Gerry and Donna, Lisbet, Hinton, and of course, Lisbet Tellefsen, such incredible cultural workers who are producing brilliant things for the world. But what I wanted to do was focus a little bit on Lisbet, just as a bit of an education. You know, most people think of an archive as part of a sort of a institutional machine. Like you can think of the Stanford Archive or even the Schlesinger Archive, et cetera. But there's a lot of really important work that people like Lisbet and the community of, however you want to call them, independent archivists or rebel archivists or grassroots archivists or political archivists. But that's incredible work because it's not a certainty that all the important, meaningful material in the world will be preserved. And we really have to give credit to people like Lisbet for whatever reason. And I think each archivist has their own reason to pursue this practice. So I want to spend some attention on Lisbet because I think Lisbet is they say amateur. Lisbet is an amateur. And in the best sense of the word, she does it out of the love of it. So Lisbet, if you could tell us a little bit about how you became what you are.
Sure. You know, just listening to all the different presentations, you know, there's an understanding of an archive in an academic frame that is a little bit unfamiliar to me. When I look at the colleagues of people like myself, I call myself a community archivist, but also there is something, the psychology of being a collector. Like as a child, I grew up in an era which was Berkeley in the 60s, where all the kids that I know had collections. So there was something about, you know, assigning value to external objects, you know, that is just part of my DNA. And so it was a natural progression from becoming a collector who, in my case, I was obsessed with posters. And growing up in Berkeley in the 60s and 70s, posters, political graphics, they're all fused. Like you can see Rasputin and Che next to Marilyn and Elvis. seamlessly. And another piece of that puzzle was, you know, I never had a particularly great memory. And as a child with an extended international family, I would often, very young, use external objects as memory for me. You know, I would travel and gather programs and whatnot. And when I would come back, I would put them together on my bed and mess around with chronological order. So as I became older and became an activist, it was just natural that I would migrate to being the record keeper for the organizations that I worked with. And over time, I just began building collections. And the Angela Davis archive was a little bit of an accident. But yeah, we can go into that a little deeper when I share my screen.
Okay. Okay. Well, I thought that was a sweet explanation of your beginnings, which is basically the kind of pure kind of sentimentality for keeping a physical object in memory of a wonderful experience. And I think that's kind of, you know, the basis for even at the largest, most sort of elaborate institutional settings, that's the spirit of the archive. Evidence of meaningful memory. So did you ever, so how would you describe your collecting interest? Do you consider it like a pathological thing, or do you, or, yes. You know, because, yeah, the pathological thing. I'm sure that's what Erica says, but meaning, so what I'm saying is, like, originally it was just this sort of practice that you did, that you didn't know you were going to create an important archive, and you also didn't know you would rise to the kind of ranks of the canon of important independent archivists. Like you'll know them, like Lincoln Cushing and the political poster stuff, Rick Prelinger with his Internet Archive, David Rumsey and his map collection, but you have that status. And so now, having become a sort of an established independent archivist, do you think about your activities differently?
Well, there has definitely been a level of intention. Like I remember clearly, I must have been like 11, but I remember watching these old documentaries on PBS, and there was, there were footage of, for example, Billie Holiday, old black and white film where she's sitting in a club and you see the smoke, and just incredible archival footage. And I remember at a very early age looking at the credits and seeing that these were from the collection of a David Chertok. And while everybody else is going on about the documentary, I'm like, who is this David Chertok? Where did he do? And these kind of seeds have just germinated in my life. And, you know, now as I look at my backstory, I have created world-class collections in many different genres. You know, as a percussionist and a musician in an earlier life, I created probably one of the largest Afro-Cuban cultural collections. Then as a publisher of a Black lesbian journal during the 80s and 90s, you know, I created a huge time capsule of that period. The Angela Davis archive was actually born, you know, I'm gonna share my screen now just so.
Please do.
All right, bear with me, folks. Oh, hey, did I get it first try? Boom, almost.
You're getting there. It's good enough.
It's good enough? Okay. So I was part of a project where with two other poster collectors, a Lincoln Cushing and a Michael Rossman, we started a project where we would digitize our poster collections together. And to make it sexy for me, they said, let's start with Angela Davis posters. And my job was, after we shot them, I would take the slides and get them digitized. And this is maybe the early 2000s, maybe 2004. And I remember getting back these DVDs and opening up basically images like this on my screen. And as a graphic design person, I was just floored to be able to look at all these images and see how, for example, that one full page photograph that appeared in Life magazine in 1970 would be used by graphic artists all around the world. And, you know, they reversed it over here, they flipped it over there, they switched out her hand over here. And it was just fascinating to me. And at the time, it was so difficult to open up this many images. I went down to the copy mat and basically just made a color Xerox and put these posters in a binder. And little did I know that placing images in a binder would become this sort of experiment in chronology and memory. And because at that time there were a lot of changes happening in technology. For example, newspapers started to liquidate their photo archives. And so I could go online and maybe purchase 50 Angela Davis or Black Panther photographs from the Chicago Tribune photo morgue. And I would once again run down to the copy mat, make a picture and put it in this binder. And so at some point, that impulse to put life back together like a jigsaw puzzle, I began experimenting with Angela Davis material. And yeah, so that was really the beginning of it. Yeah, so I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, that's such a great way to talk about how you just sort of follow an instinct and an inclination, but also, you know what they say about acting, act what you know, and Angela is a citizen of the same community in the East Bay. So we talked a little bit about this, Angela's relationship to the archive, and Angela, I think, has been very generous, not getting too much in your business, but she does visit occasionally. And I think she gave that insight of like, yeah, that was me years ago. And I found that interesting. We think of this as an Angela Davis archive when it's really Angela Davis from what, 1968 to 72, right?
Well, by far the majority of the production of materials was during that slice of, you know, probably late 1970 to 1972. There is a large amount of material from her UCLA chapter, which was in 1969, the beginning of her coming to public prominence when she was fired from her first teaching gig for being a member of the Communist Party. Yeah. And yeah, you know, she's not a nostalgic person. You know, I've known her for, gosh, going on 40 years now. And you know, when we get together, we're not talking about, you know, we're probably talking about yoga, you know, not free by the people.
I have a friend that's in that yoga class, and she's constantly like, oh my God, Angela's in my yoga class.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic. That's just regular people doing things.
Well, one of the things that I just want to say, one of the things that spending so much time in the archives, especially around mass communication materials like photographs, you really notice how the narrative around her was so skewed. Like, for example, back in 71, 72, every newspaper across the country would get these photographs with the captions already written, and who wrote those? And so, you know, I do feel as an archivist, you know, of the history that means something to me, you know, I'm making sure that it's a complete story. I'm making sure that all of that which such intention was devoted to skewing, that it exists and, you know, continues to exist. So, you know, that's kind of where my passion is.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt the same responsibility when I was doing the Black Panther show. Like, so much of the Panther story has had them described as thugs, violent extremists, blah, 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 but that was not the truth. And so I think you have to have the evidence, not only have to have evidence, but interpret it well and cite fact, you know. So I really thank you for taking that responsibility. So let me ask you, moving forward, you've built quite a mature collection of Angela's work. I think you mentioned that there's some hope in the future for completing your engagement with that material. You said you're gonna...
Yeah, I think almost every collector or archivist who has, you know, sitting on a large amount of material, you recognize that at some point you need to think about endgame. And, you know, I've already placed a lot of material at different institutions. You know, I get a lot of researchers and curators coming through. I mean, Kathleen, I don't know how you heard about me in Germany, but, you know, I do get a lot of use from the archive, but, you know, it is definitely, you know, it can be a full-time job. And I think that there are other institutions that are better positioned. I know Erica would certainly love to get the stuff out of the house. But yeah, so it's something that I'm committed to, but, you know, as involved as I am now in maintaining an archive around Angela and the Panthers, you know, I was just as invested in my Black LGBT archive, which is now at Yale. And so, you know, I'm sure there are other chapters. You know, I'm actually wondering where this is going to go next, because my backstory is I can certainly be completely immersed in something, and people who know me from that period can't imagine I would ever do anything else with my life. Right. But when I close the book on that chapter, it can be game on for something else. So I'm kind of curious to see what my 60s are going to be.
Well, that's a good place to end, because in a way it's a celebration of your accomplishment, and we anticipate all the wonderful things you'll do in the future. Let me just put one last bit of spin on this. I got my first vaccine yesterday. So not just that it's topical, but it's relevant, because it occurred to me that archives are like vaccines. You know, you take a bit of the past and you bring it forward to inoculate, and particularly around histories, marginalized histories of African Americans. Like, it's really important to bring these elements, and often painful elements, to the future so that we can make a better place. So thank you, Lisbet, for being our Dr. Fauci.
You're too kind, sir. You're too kind.
With that, I think we could pass it on to Kathleen. Thank you. You're wonderful, charming as always.
Thank you so much, Lisbet and Renee. I could listen to you for hours. And when I was visiting Lisbet, she knows I stayed for quite a while, actually, to do exactly this. What I think was very important was actually also Renee's mentioning of this like idea of like a prophylaxis. So something that would take something of now, of today, or of that time to save it for the future, to like basically gear us also with those materials for the future. And I know that that I have had a conversation maybe already 2 years ago with Donna and Gerry about this, and about the problematic also about, of course, curating or doing an exhibition that is based on Angela Davis, who of course is somehow for many people like frozen in time, frozen in those images. And she has also written about this. She has written about this in her famous essay, Afro Images, that like how she wanted to come to terms with her image as this like 27, 28-year-old revolutionary being the only image that is also in people's heads. And for me, that was also very challenging, because this was what people in the GDR remembered. Oh, the fro, yes. And how to disrupt this. And I would like to ask Gerry, as also a design historian, what drove Donna and Gerry's decisions, what works to include, what posters and images to pull from Lisbet's collection for your exhibition, and how this was guiding you, and how this also influenced then maybe after Gerry, Elizabeth Hinton's like approach to the archive, like that was more based on materials that do not have such a visual foregrounding as in a contemporary art exhibition, or an art exhibition, or visual culture in general.
Well, I don't know if Donna wants to join me on this as well, but one of the things about our decisions were that actually we were going to take a lot from the archive, that we wanted this multiplicity. There's a lot, obviously, that neither Lisbet or we have been able to show. A lot of reading material, a lot of publications, some of which aren't visually stunning. You know, they're dry little cheaply produced brochures, but we're putting all of these things in conversation with each other. I was worried when we decided to go down this route of having as many images as posters or magazines as we could get in the space. That Donna wouldn't go for it because she's running the museum, and she knows how much work is going to go into this. And B, also it might be a little repetitive or boring. But I think the book behind Donna there, which was the first time, it's the catalogue of the show, it's the first time we saw like multiple images of the same young Black woman, some of which are beautiful in terms of graphic design history, some of which are, amateur in the way that Renee used that term, done for the love of a cause, but not necessarily with great skill. Would it be a little repetitive and boring? But no, I was pleased when we got the catalogue to see that this variation that Lisbet talked about as well is important. So we wanted to see what's different when a French poster reproduces an image of, and there's some beautiful images of Angela from the French demonstrations organized by Foucault in part. So there are beautiful images, there are Cuban images, and seeing those things, how this one person can be seen in so many different ways. In the GDR, for instance, versus the English posters, the London posters that were produced, which have their own particular take on Angela. So multiplicity was important for us in that, and we didn't make aesthetic decisions, I think. Donna, would you agree?
Yeah, I want to say that I was completely floored when I first came to Lisbet's house and saw the archive in a room just covering every surface. I just thought the astounding complexity of history as presented by just hundreds of documents was, I thought, such an interesting concept. And I have to say that, you know, the Zimmerli Art Museum is a university art museum. You know, I was very interested in the archive coming in as big a piece as possible to sort of show students what it means to really engage with history in this, on this level. So, and I think the you know, the way images just flew across the continent, across the world, the same images being used. I think that is also a very interesting thing to be thinking about, you know, now that we're in the world of the internet, but this was like pre-internet. So multiplicity was really important. And I don't want to take up too much more time, but everything that Gerry said, I totally agree with.
Elizabeth?
Just really briefly, I mean, I think for me, you know, like the huge challenge was that I'm trained as a historian. So the documents that were really exciting to me were not what would be a visually appealing. And so, you know, I brought to the committee hundreds and hundreds of documents, like correspondence with Marcuse and you know, because most of the archive itself is Angela Davis's writing, is her political thought, is seeing her go through drafts and re-edit. Are those, you know, the note cards that I showed you from her thesis, her undergraduate thesis note-taking, we see that that's a practice that she maintains. And I found this fascinating. I found the cuts that she made to women, race, and class fascinating. And I think that should be on a museum wall, but that's not, you know, there's limited space, right? And that's not, that I had to get reeled in. So there's definitely a different set of priorities between like how we want to present someone when we're writing about them versus when we're putting aspects of their life on display. And they both, you know, present these really interesting challenges. But that's partly why too, you know, I mean, the archive, as I said, does skew towards, as Lisbet was just saying, you know, that late 60s, early 70s moment, because that's when the most kind of visually appealing material production around Angela Davis was happening, because she was, you know, imprisoned, and that was, you know, at the height of her kind of global fame. But there was just so much more that that we couldn't include, and that wasn't as visually gripping as that revolutionary moment period. So I think that's the challenge, I think, in exhibiting Angela's life in general, is that, you know, like the like her evolution as like one of the foremost political philosophers of the 20th century, especially in the 70s and 80s, and then her work with critical resistance, although critical resistance did produce a number of really visually appealing materials and posters, but it doesn't kind of match the scale of the earlier period. And so that's, I think, one of the big challenges, to get her out of that, like, you know, as we've been talking about, the Afro Angela, and into a fuller person who evolved over time and whose politics evolved.
You know, I want to say one thing about, you know, that massive production in that moment. It was also a convergence, you know, in that moment. It was the height of, you know, the alternative press, you know, all the student press. It was the burgeoning Black Power movement. It was the anti-war movement. It was the global Communist Party. So yeah. I don't know that there has ever been that much production. And she kind of, you know, the different facets of her really make her kind of unique. I think the closest I can say is like an image of Che Guevara, where, you know, that moment, you know, where kids are buying these posters, you know, student activists are buying these posters, but I don't know that if this were to happen today, even these cases today, that you would see that type of production. You know, it was just this, you know, tranche of time And yeah, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. It was a revolutionary moment when all sorts of things were being done differently. Like, you know, just the relationship between the artist and the political movement that had never been so strongly married before then. You know, everyone was just really swept up. But yeah, it was quite a time. Quite a time. My joke with Angela was that image of her as a young person. She's sort of like Che Guevara and Beyonce. It's kind of you know, she has that kind of like seriousness, but this kind of extra thing. Like, I don't think any other political figure has that kind of sort of. I don't mean this in any weird way, but there's a sexiness about her image. You know, this sort of it's hard to say that any other political icon has that combination of seriousness and sort of this sort of compelling charisma, I guess.
Or, you know, just to add to that briefly, glamorousness. Like, I know that, you know, Angela herself would probably never allow this to happen, but just going through the archive, there's also tons and tons of images of her. And I like, you know, another exhibit could be like, you know, like Angela Davis, like revolutionary fashion icon, because her, like the clothes, I just loved like seeing the evolution of her style and clothing choices and hair, and it's just, and that's captured in the archive, and also really, really beautiful and stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I had the good fortune of talking to a lot of former Panthers, and they were very conscious about culture and visual representation and how that moved the movement forward from the newspaper to what they wore, you know, the you know, what it said when they wore leather jackets and powder blue, and how they're being orderly, what that said, you know, this compelling image of orderly black men, what that said, and how that helped move the movement. So it's not surprising that people like I guess Huey was a poet and Elaine Brown was a singer, and you know, there's all sorts of cultural people in that movement. So definitely it's a good combination, culture and politics. But
so for me, it was also very, very interesting to look at the paintings that were made of her. Yeah. In this like socialist realist method, because you can see, and I showed this at the very beginning, there was one painting where you see her in like a matching costume, which she would never wear in real life, but like this projection that she, as a teacher, as a philosopher, and as a proper communist, would of course wear this, was then, I guess, also part of this fascination that East German and youth had with her, because of course she came in this glamorous look into this like very closed circuit of the Eastern Bloc, and she brought this newness, this youth into this realm, and I think this was also the fascinating combination, like all throughout the visual materials, like of that period, that she brought to the table. Yeah, I think we are already over time, and I mean, I have so many other things that of course I would love to talk to you guys about, and but I was it was just a fascinating combination of people, of panelists here, and I'm very grateful that this worked out and that we could make it happen. So I would like to very much thank you for sharing this, and for also sharing this with the audience of the Goethe-Institut. And we have already mentioned the catalogs. Now is the time again to make a little promo. So Donna and Gerry and Lisbet, they have already had the catalog in the bag. So Angela Davis Sees the Time is available. I think you're already on your second print run, which is great. So you can order this at your local book dealer. We are not mentioning the online dealers. Of course, we're going to our local dealers to order this and pick it up. Same thing here with the 1 Million Roses catalog. Part of the text in the 1 Million Roses catalog, and also the interview that Renee did with Angela Davis, and which is in both books, will also be shared on the Goethe-Institut's website in the dossier section that they created. So I encourage you to check this out. And there's also an ongoing film series that is available to stream. The Simile show is opening in fall of this year. So check out the website of the Simile Art Museum and get the dates. And yeah, and now we just can hope that maybe the 1 Million Roses might reopen at some point. But I think events like this are already a good compensation for that. And and if you if you have more questions, and this is what also Denise just wrote to me, so the Goethe-Institut can also forward questions to all of the panelists. So you can write them, you can write your questions that you might not dare to ask in this situation to program-newyork@goethe.de, which is also on the Goethe's website. And yes, so I would like to very much thank Elizabeth Hinton, Gerry Beegan, Donna Gustafson, Renee Guzman, and Lisbet Tellefsen, and of course the Goethe-Institut, so Dennis Sedko, Jörg Schumacher, who invited us also, and Catherine Meller, who actually was the tech wizard behind all of this. So I wish everyone a good dive into the weekend. Let's hope everyone gets their shots soon, so we are getting out of this situation, and we can all continue doing this great work that, of course, you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you all in real person very soon and often. My best wishes to everyone. And thank you. This has been such a pleasure. And I want to thank everyone who logged in to listen to this talk. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Renee. Bye, everyone.